Aditya, hi, good to have you with us. How have you been?
Hi, Ashu. I've been really well. Thank you so much for doing this, and it's great connecting with you again.
This was a long pending session, Aditya. Given what we've been through in the last 1.5 years, right? I think
Right,
it's become a very, very important conversation, right? Because you are a technology player who sits very critically between large brands, enterprises, and last mile retail, right? And you
right,
essentially help these brands communicate with these stores, right? By bringing in a lot of efficiency, right?
right,
And in terms of helping them communicate with their customers, further down the value chain,
right,
evangelizing the cause for the brands with the stores, right?
right,
And I think this has been a very, very unreal time, right? And I think this relationship has gone through a very distinct kind of a change, right? While, of course,
right,
on one hand, we're kind of seeing a solid tendency on an offline setting.
right,
There is a new model which is emerging. That is the direct to consumer, right? And I think now a lot
right.
of brands are now looking at that as well, right? And I think we're going to what we're
Sure.
possibly going to see, and given what India is, right, as a market, right, which is fairly complex, right? I think we'll possibly have the answer somewhere in the middle. But what will essentially
Right.
become
Yeah.
important is a role of a player like yourself, who's really helping brands navigate right across
Right.
the value chain and engage with their customers better, right? So I think with that context, right, I think this becomes an interesting and an important conversation, right?
Sure.
Because what we're talking about is possibly the next decade or about 1.5 decades of how the market is going to sort of play out, right? And also it's becoming
Right.
dynamic by the day, right?
Oh,
So
yes.
and that, like I said, this becomes, with all of this in context, it becomes a very exciting conversation, right? But Aditya, before we do that, right, before we dive into the Love and Store journey, right, when we talk
Sure.
about, what you've been doing, right, for a
Correct.
reasonable amount of time, I'd love to understand a little more about, all of great work that you've done before that, right? You've been a professional, who chose to move and set up his, enterprise. You've been bootstrapped, which is again an
Right.
aspect that I would love to talk to you today about.
Right.
But tell me a little more about your journey, right? And from there we dive in.
Yeah, sure. Thank you again. We're a bit different in terms of a company. Like you said, we are bootstrapped, right? So I think I was a regular sort of engineer, unfortunately, then MBA, and then got into a job. Till then, I think I was enjoying myself. So my first company was Godrej Consumer, a
Right.
really big, great FMCG, now also a client. And my second company was Reckitt Benckiser, another huge FMCG, and then also a client now. So that was my journey, more or less. Finished in 2013. In 4 years, did an ASM's job. Now, ASM's
Right.
job is typically one of the harder sort of jobs in the market. But the good
Right.
part about it is that you learn everything possible. In Hindi we say bhasad, right? You learn how to manage all the bhasad
Right.
possible, and and then there was always this thought of trying to figure out something. Now, having been in FMCG sales for about 4 years, that too in UP and Delhi, I
Right.
sort of figured out that there's a space wherein there could be a business large enough. What happens also is that when you graduate from a certain business school and then you work in these jobs, there
Right.
is a certain pushiness that does come attached with it. So you think that, oh, do I want to take the plunge or not?
Right.
And then thankfully I got fired from my last job. So it was not a very so it was not a very hard decision to sort of get there. So
Right.
I got fired and I thought what to do. So I was interviewing in jobs, etc. But I thought that, probably it's a great time to just
Right.
maybe figure it out. So I got a co-working space in Okla, 8,000 bucks a seat. I said, wow, this is amazing. 5 minutes from my house,
Right.
and started sitting there with my laptop with, of course, nothing to do. So about 6, 7 hours a day used to catch there, and then made a presentation called What's in Store,
Right.
because
Interesting.
probably for myself. So I was
Right.
like, okay, let me put together a 10 slider. Job interviews were happening parallelly,
Right.
and once the 10 slider was ready, thankfully, because I was from the industry, it is very easy to just call up people and say that I want to meet you for 10 minutes, or
Right.
speak to you for 10 minutes. I met a lot of good people, and mostly people said, yeah, this seems like a good idea. A lot of them
Right.
also said that I don't know if it's a large enough opportunity,
Right.
which of course we also didn't know, but they said, yeah, probably something that you can explore.
Right.
So by the end of then, so all this was figured out, and I got a sales head job offer for one of the big food unicorns right now,
Right.
which
Interesting.
continue to exist. So I was like, oh, okay, this is a tough one. And I thought that,
Right.
okay, I'm living at home, no rent. So if I can take the plunge right now, probably is an easier time for me.
Right.
So I let that go. Fate made me meet, Mr. Nishit Sood. So Nishit used to run a company called Yuma Business, which still, of course, runs very well. And it was a manpower services organization.
Interesting.
So when we met, we realized that, manpower is going to be a big piece of the puzzle that I want to solve. If we can do something together, it'll be fabulous. So we together joined hands and launched Love in Store with the focus that we want to create FMCG industry specific solutions. Now, if you look at it, it became really hard to explain. So probably one of the reasons we never raised money is we could never tell what we are doing, right? So it was, I don't think my parents also fully understand as of now what exactly we are up to. But I think that was the beginning. So Jan 2017 was co-working, and then April 2017 is when we joined hands. And I think first year was about 3 FMCG customers. Of course, Reckitt was kind enough to be our first, and then Britannia happened, and then PepsiCo happened. So again, people, who thought that, okay, this guy seems to have left a nice job to do this, probably knows what he's doing. So I used to pitch and get there. After an year, we figured out, okay, this is going to sort of take off. And then with all our might together, it has been a fabulous journey. So it's been about 4 years, 4.5 years now. It's going to be 5 years on 1st January 2017, the day I started setting at my co-work. And we've built a 150 crore plus organization with 3,000 plus employees. And we currently work with about 20 to 23 of the top 30 FMCGs in India by revenue.
Wow.
So it's been a fabulous run and bootstrapped, which is, I would say, but I realized something. I think we never really had the time to raise money. I think raising money is also a full-time job. It's not, it's not, no doubt. I mean, investors come with, so much potential to grow the business. But when we had a few of the conversations, we realized that, we need a full-time founder to sort of run and get raise money. So I think we just put our heads in operations, and that's how we've grown. So I would say we're a more traditional startup in that sense. And we'll be done with the definition of a startup another 3 months from now, because we'll be 5 years and 100 crore plus as well. So then we call ourselves a company, I think, from there on.
No, I think I completely relate with it. I think when I come across a lot of founders, right? Of course, the ones who raise capital and the ones who want to raise capital, right? And I think I think and I find it difficult, right? When one kind of hinges his or her aspirations on fundraise, right? I think till then it's not going to fly, right? It's an extremely difficult one, and I completely relate with where you're coming from, right? I mean, if you're driven, if you have a clarity in terms of what you want to get to, right? I mean, you find ways out. You don't necessarily have to go down that route where you want to be burning capital and acquiring a customer, or changing that mindset, behavior, whatever, right? So I think you, and I can completely relate with that, right? You just tend to prioritize it in a very different way, right? I think the urgency is very different. But listen, I think we're going to use this occasion to for you to explain us what you do, right? And I think this could possibly become a narrative for, I think, many people who still want to understand are kind of, in a way, confused and not very, very clear about what you do, right? So tell us a little more about in terms of what are the kind of services that you offer, right? I mean, I'd love to understand a little more about that, because there are quite a few that you do, right? That you offer to these enterprises and brands, right? To, like I said, go out and communicate with the retail partners and eventually collect a lot of data in the process. Tell me a little more about the product side of it, right? And what are the services that you offer?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll do a bit of industry context before I sort of get into the product, because it's a B2B business. So it's very important to understand the industry. See, India, again, even after COVID, still 90% plus of the sales of FMCG goods comes from the offline channel. And 80% plus of that business comes from the grocery kirana that you sort of visit to buy a bread or an egg from. Now, India has 1 crore kirana stores. That is 30% of the world's kirana stores. So even though India has 15% of the population, they have 30% kiranas, and they contribute a large chunk of the business. Now, India has a concept of MRP. India has a concept of fixed margins. Now, out of these 1 crore kiranas, obviously there will be some that give much larger business contribution to the companies, right? There will be a big store in a catchment area. Maybe if you're from Delhi, you will be aware of Raj Mandir in Bombay and Alpha or Ratnadeep. There will be chains and stores, etc., which will contribute much larger businesses. Now, how do brands engage with them? So no innovation from our side. Brands have been doing this for like 20, 25 years, where they said something very simple, that you're an important store for me. I will place a visibility asset in your store. So if I'm a chilled brand, I'll probably place a chiller like a beverage company or a chocolate company. If I don't require that, I'll do some window dressing, let's say like any pharma company or any grocery company. And because you're letting me do that, I will give you some money for it. That was a one-line single idea that the companies had, and very normal. I mean, that's what I call it moment of truth marketing. So when the consumer comes face to face with your brand in a store, you want to be most visible there. If your advertising says that we are Ayurvedic, you want the consumer to see Ayurvedic when they come to the store. Now, the problem with 20 years of operation was that, India, it's very normal in operations to have points of failure. So one point of failure was that, is the merchandiser going to the store, is he or she trained well enough? Second was, is there technology to track them?
Right.
Third was that grocer is a part of 20 programs, right? End of the day, the same grocer is a part of multiple programs.
Right.
Does that grocer even care about my company so much, or am I just paying this money?
Right.
And fourth, which is always a problem, is that I am not directly connected with the grocer. I am connected to my distributor. Distributor is
Right.
connected sometimes to a sub distributor and then a grocer. Is the money that is supposed to go to the grocer, is that going to the grocer?
Right.
Now, anybody who's worked in FMCG for 1 month in internship also will know that this is a problem that exists. So it's not something that we identified. I think what happens as an entrepreneur is that, you're so aspirational. So I thought I'll solve all of this.
Right.
And we ended up doing it. But when we got to it, we realized, oh, this is not that easy to solve. But that's why it's been hanging for a very long time.
Right.
So we said that if I solve all of these problems, obviously there is a business that could come around it. The only thing is that how much will companies be willing to spend? So I think that is one problem we solved, where we said that, boss, your trained merchandiser, mobile application technology, image recognition technology, direct communication technology, direct payment to retailer, all of that is purchased from a single service provider, which is me.
Right.
You want a person in Guwahati, in Bhopal, I am there in top 300 cities. I have all the manpower available in the world. I have a training system. I have a technology system. I'll take care of all of that. Now, that is, I think, the first part of the business, essentially, which happened and which grew very fast, helped us acquire a lot of big FMCG names. And then the second channel we hit was modern trade. So again, modern trade in India has existed fairly well, though it has not crossed more than 10 to 15% sales for most organizations. But it is a very important channel, with Reliance, with DMart, Big Bazaars, and even the Ratnadeeps, Nilgiris of the world. It's a very important channel where the use case of merchandising is much larger. And then there's a solid use case of in-store promoters. So I'm sure if you would have gone to a store, they would have spoken to you that, why don't you buy this and try this? And same problem. Is my promoter trained? Is my promoter there in the store? Is my merchandising element there? I was running a 10 rupee off. Is that 10 rupee of running in the store or not?
Right.
All those problems again existed. Why? Because of the number of modern trades in the country is about 8,000.
Right.
So I said, okay, then this is a smaller problem to solve, because I can just put manpower in these cities also, use the same technology and solve these problems as well. So these are the two large problems that we identified, which then has become a very large business, now working with about 23 FMCGs to be precise. And then I think that payment thing that I was doing to the retailer then became about 30% of the business, because I realized that in India, whenever you pay through somebody, there's always a chance of pilferage. So they said that probably this guy can do a better job. So then that has become a additional, I would say, a learning for us, that last 2.5 years, that also done very well.
Very interesting.
So that is the business. Again, that's why when people tell me to give an elevator pitch, I said we need 100 for elevator. We cannot we cannot do it in 10 seconds. But this has been the business exactly. And for this, I charge the FMCG. They are the ones who are paying the service fees. And then I'm responsible for managing a very intense operation that runs pan India.
Right. Typically when you're in a unique sort of position, right, where you are essentially a product company and a services company, right?
Correct.
And typically what tends to happen in an Indian environment, and I'm sure you will agree to it, and and I understand that this is a session that you're talking to is going to be out available to many people, and you might not want to confess literally to the pain that you sort of come across. But services is a difficult business in India, right? I mean, there are many memes and and many creative ways that we see, right? When we talk of budgets, right? For example, I mean, the expectation is that of a Ferrari, and what you sort of get budgets for is a Fiat, right? The smaller one, right? It's a huge problem, right? I mean, India is an extremely cost-sensitive market, and I think we look at everything, as soon as there's a vendor, right? As soon as there's a partner, we start looking at it from a lens of cost, right? Becomes very difficult, right? What do you do of that kind of a mindset, right? I mean, how do you change that mindset, right? Is this something that you also kind of encounter as you go along? I'd love to understand a little more about that.
Yeah, sure. I think before I delve into that, I want to tell you the two jokes that I have for my clients, right? One of them I always tell them is that if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. And then the second thing I tell my team is that James Bond's next film is called No Time to Die. Basically, it is James Bond is playing a service provider in India who's working with many clients across the country.
Right.
See, on a serious note, in India, when we look at services, right, we don't account for time that well. We can account for a product. We can say we are buying a car, but when we say a service, essentially you're paying for people's time.
Right.
which could be as valuable as invaluable as you want it to be, right? So we encounter the cost conversation every day. We encounter cost conversations with clients which we have signed up 1 year ago.
Right.
Who say that, okay, you've been working with us for 1 year now, give us a discount. I said, oh, okay, but there is some inflation also which you may want to account for. See, it's not an easy conversation, but I think what we've realized, I think over building up a profitable business in for 4.5 years, is that I think a great transparency always works. So I think we definitely hit the original business model of cost plus percentage very well, and saying that, so this is what I'm going to make in terms of my net profit. This is where I want to stick to. Everything else that is going to be there on numbers will be paid out. Whether it is salaries to the manpower in the field, whether it is money to the store, etc., etc. I don't want to make money on arbitrage. I genuinely want to make money on service fees and service levels. So I think that is one thing where I think clients do get convinced after a point in time. And I think second thing that I realized, it's probably great to do a pilot. Let them, whatever they want to spend. They want to spend 1 lakh, 5 lakh, 10 lakhs, give it a shot. Tell them, okay, we'll put 3 merchandisers in whatever city you want us to do. Have a look at what it is saying, and then probably give them a cost for the national program. I think these things is what I think has worked very well. But yeah, I mean, we read it like a 5-star hotel menu. Yeah, we read it from right to left. I think when you look at services, it's a little hard. But after 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years, once the clients have seen value, if you have been able to show them the incremental business that has come in, or if the channel has done better, etc., then I think that conversation sort of does not happen again. Then it's more like.
But when you talk of India market, right? I think our problem is that of too many, right? I think we have too many of everything, right? Now, essentially, what happens is in an environment like that, and you're absolutely right. And in fact, there was a question that I had in my mind, right? I actually come to that, right? Is that once you start out, right, there are many Me Too's that come up, right? Who are offering, say, a 5-7% plus minus variance of service, right? I mean, quality is still to be proven, right? But essentially, what happens is, and the easiest thing that works in India, right, is undercutting, right? I mean, you underprice it, and that becomes your actual growth. Right, and that's like the standard, right? Now, what happens in an environment like this, and like I said, right, I mean, we're starting from a point of looking at any activity as a cost center, right? I mean, why do we do that? I'll just come to that in a bit, right? But that is a huge problem area, right? I mean, how do you solve for that, right? Because the clients, like I said, right, I mean, eventually in a B2B environment, there is constant pressure. Marketing is possibly what you deal with, right? Marketing and strategy is what you will possibly deal with, right? And I think marketing is the most sensitive of areas, right? When it comes to any cost side aspects, right? I mean, what do you do in an environment like that? I mean, I'm in a way alluding to the competitive environment, right? And the clients switching out to them, right? I mean, how do you kind of manage that given an environment like I said? I mean, it's Me Too, right? There are people who could be undercutting you in price, right? Offering it at a much discount, right? How do you sort of manage that environment?
Right. I think I'll answer it in 2 parts, right? First, from the client side of it, I think so. This area is called trade marketing. So I think typically any consumer company has 10% of their revenue spent on trade marketing. So it's a sizable budget that they're already spending. You will probably be a very minuscule part of it if you're giving this service, be it any vendor of our type, of our kind, etc., etc. So end of the day, I always tell people that if you're getting into a B2B business, right, if there's already money being spent, it is probably easier for you to acquire some business there.
Right.
Now, coming to the competitive environment, I completely agree. I think when we started, honestly, I didn't know about the existing players. Probably that was a good thing because we were not sort of colored in terms of pricing or whatever. We said, this is our cost, this is the money we want to make. Because again, bootstrapped, right? So we need to make some money, run our houses, right? So we said that that's what we want to do. So Me Too's will happen. 4, 5, 10 companies probably would have come up in the last 3, 4 odd years. But I think where differentiation sort of existed for us and continues to is 2 things. I think one is that we've built very solid futuristic technology in-house. Having a tech team is very, very hard. So I think it's not an easy one to do. I mean, you will keep reading, articles about 20%, 30% attritions and, all those things in tech. So I think one thing that we did very well is we built a platform from day one without sort of saying that, this is going to be a revenue generator. This is going to be a service enabler. But we want to develop it in-house with the perspective of continuing to develop it for 5, 7 years. Now, because we've been developing the platform for 4.5 years, and with every acquisition, some features get added, you sort of become way ahead of your competition in terms of product, and which is where your product and service conversation sort of comes in. So your product becomes a big differentiator. because as you said, the service can always be underpriced. I think that is,
Right.
one differentiator. Second is that I would say that I've exploited this already enough, but right, I've come from FMCG. I
Right.
know the lingo, I know the conversation, and I know how they will calculate return.
Right.
So the thing is that if you're getting them to spend 1 crore or 1 lakh on you,
Right.
right, it is completely up to you of how do you want them to calculate the return on the spend that you're making, because
Right.
it is a trade marketing spend. You're telling them that, boss, you spend 100 crores in this budget. I'm asking you to spend 1.5 crores of this here.
Right.
And you've already been spending this 1.5 crores. You just don't know it very well.
Right.
I'm just cleaning it up for you and making some money by charging your service fees. If you're able to have that conversation very well, it is not going to be a very hard thing. So for example, till now we've had probably like 1 or 2 disengagements over the last 4.5 years, which is less than 10% of our current client base. So essentially, I think that's something where we feel that the pricing is important, but it will not be a decision maker once you've been able to prove the value that you bring on the table.
Right. Interesting. You've actually walked me into my next question, right? Which was essentially around, performance tracking, right? And in a traditional environment, right? And I think when you talk of offline, the entire value chain, I think there is a huge, it's essentially offline, right? I mean, there is little tracking which is happening, right? In fact, that's become one primary reason of D2C kind of taking off, right? And I think COVID became a perfect opportunity. And I'll come to that in just a bit, right? But I want to talk a little about the impact side of it. I think a lot of what you're talking about, Aditya, right? And even for example, calculating ROI is essentially a very, it's not an absolute figure. You don't necessarily know that, this is the input which is going in and this is exactly the output which is coming out, right?
Correct.
I mean, one can comprehend in his or her own way, right? In terms of, cutting it, dissecting it, right? It possibly is a, if I am to look at it as a certain business, right, I'll look at it possibly as a cost of doing business, right? And I want to continue to sort of reduce that to as little as I can, right? Because of lack of clarity, right? What's the sense there? I mean, how difficult does navigation become in that? I mean, you alluded to it, right? I want to understand a little more about it, right? What are some of those critical concerns that stakeholders have, right? I have been in many conversations with marketers. I've been friends with a lot of CMOs across organizations, right? Typically, what and there's a defensive that they're operating in, right? They don't necessarily want to go out and kind of spend, right? That aggression is missing, right? So you see a very different kind of an aggression in leadership, and then you see a very different kind of an aggression when it comes to the execution team, right? Is this something that you also sort of come across? What's the does it get bureaucratic at times, right? Because it's a B2B environment, right? It's a difficult environment to sort of operate it, right? What's your sense of it? I mean, how do you dissect this entire the complexity which is involved in from decision making to execution, and not necessarily having a very clear assessment of impact? I'm not saying it's not there at all, but I'm saying it's still not absolute in nature.
Sure.
How do you cut that entire situation?
So I think one is that it's always good to have understanding of how the hierarchy works in any of a new age organization as well. We will typically be dealing with trade marketing and then sales and then maybe senior leadership and then procurement and multiple departments, and each of them probably could have a different way of looking at ROI.
Sure.
So one is that you should of course be mentally prepared and understanding of how they look at spends.
Right.
Again, I would say that because we are not a very big spend in the overall scheme of things, it is not something that I would say pinches anyone. It is probably something that do I want to do it with them, or do I want to continue the model that I've been operating for 15-20 years?
Right.
So it's more of a conversation of is it time for me to modernize? Is my sales system ready to take it? Do I have the bandwidth to make the changeover? Wherein you have to sort of have a convincing conversation saying that you are actually helping them reduce bandwidth consumption on any of these things, because it's like working with an agency that they just have a better skill set than yours, and probably at lower cost they can manage the show better.
Right.
So I think that is one part of how do you manage bureaucracy and the ROIs and everything. So I want to answer that the second part of it a bit more detail. See, how do you look at ROI is definitely a question that is difficult to answer. I think what has happened also, I think in the last 5-7 years, with digital marketing becoming a very, very mainstay for most of the organizations, they are very used to instant ROIs, right?
Correct.
It's not about the absolute ROI, but it's more about the speed of the return.
Right.
And because we are in an offline traditional operations business, it does take about 1 month, 2 months to stabilize operations, and probably a quarter to start looking at that calculation. So I think that is something where it takes a bit of education. Of course, clients understand this really well, and it takes a bit of education from our side to tell them that, we can hit the ground running on 1st of October, but because we are going to be managing 400 people,
Right.
it will take us about a month to stabilize the operation, to
Right.
get the technology in place, to get you enough data and insights from your stores, and after a quarter start looking at returns. But
Right.
if you look at return in January for a program that went live in October, you will be sorted. But
Right.
don't compare us saying that, okay, what was my click through if I ran this ad on 1st of October, 7th October, how are things going?
Right.
So I
Right.
think that is where I would say the harder part of it sort of comes in. The good part is that, as I said, that, these are the top, like maybe not even 1% of the total grocers in India, or
Right.
maybe like, 1% of the total groceries that companies cover. We always tell them to look at an invested versus non-invested sort of channel,
Interesting.
where we say that, you are running advertising for all stores. So it's
Right.
not that somebody who shops from here or some other store is seeing a different advertising.
Right.
You're running the same margins across the store. The only difference you're sort of generating is probably you're making investments in in-store spends here, which you're
Right.
not making in the other. If you're able to compare it and get a delta return, you have an ROI in place on the program.
Right.
And
Very
and now
interesting.
I know, so now I know these numbers so well that I can do them on pen paper as well. That I tell them
Right.
that this is the incremental business you need to get on a per store basis
Right.
to justify your spend on the program, and you will take around 3 months, 4 months to reach there. And I think the good part also is that, see, there's also a softer angle to it, right? You also
Right.
tell them that we are helping you manage your retailer relationships better. So
Right.
it's not just going to be, that this is you spend $500 and you get $1,500 of business.
Right.
It is also saying that the retailer is going to remember that 1,500 came from a certain organization and it helped me grow
Sure.
business, and etc. etc. So
Interesting.
that softer angle works. Yeah.
My sense is, right. I mean, you come across a lot of these advertisements, right? And of course, now the environment is where you can very quickly order and all of that, right? But
Yeah.
there is an overwhelming number of products that are coming to fore, right? They're now available. It just becomes very difficult to navigate, right? And how do you
Yeah.
prioritize? Right. I mean, if this kind of occurs in your feed or something when you're watching something, it's a very
Correct.
different thing, right? And it could possibly
Correct.
interest you, and from there you can sort of go on to order all that. But I continue to feel that I think from doing a digital spend, and which you kind of rightly kind of highlighted, right, Aditya, is that when you're doing those digital spends, you're going to need a continuity, right? And I think which is a very critical piece, right, for
Right.
somebody to carry it in a certain store, right? So your
Yeah.
digital marketing, given that everybody is now kind of spending the same amount of money in the digital this thing, right? It's becoming expensive by the day, right? I think this is something
Right.
that everybody's kind of talking, right? Either in certain forums or in a harsh way, but
Sure.
everybody's
Yeah.
eventually chasing the same consumer, right? Because you can dissect consumer in just about a
Sure.
few formats,
Yeah.
right? I mean, a
Yeah.
few parameters, right? It's
Right.
becoming difficult, right? So if you do not have that continuity on the ground, right,
Yeah.
where the
Yeah.
potential customer is going to be, is a huge gap. So while you
Yeah.
could have made the dent from an interest standpoint, but lack of continuity could lead into a much lower ROI than you expect, right? And that
Right.
could just
Right. Right.
fizzle out the entire effort that one is put in, right? So I kind of completely
Correct.
agree with you. I think it's going to be a hybrid. I think a lot of that continuity will have to be built, given what we are seeing, right? And then given the competitive
Right.
environment that we're going to be in, I think that continuity is going to be important. And I think that'll have to be my senses. I mean, when I look at it distance, right, and when like I said, I mean,
Yeah.
I talk to many people, and I find that that complexity, right, in terms of making a choice. I think it's going to be a blended play, right? I don't think it's going to be a
Right.
very clear A or B, but I think it's
Very
going to be
true.
a
Yeah.
blended play, right?
Right.
I mean, I would love to discuss a little more about COVID, right? I think we've kind of alluded to it across our points, right? And I think,
Sure.
but I think retail is just taken off in a beautiful way, right? Retail is
Right.
something,
Yeah.
I mean, nobody expected the kind of sales that we've seen, the kind of bump ups that we've seen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Including us, I must say. Yeah.
all of us, right? I mean, I think everybody's
Yeah.
put on a few extra kgs, right? I think those early
That's
exercises,
true. Yeah.
the early exercises, I think that kind of fizzled out much faster than we anticipated. But no, I think what has happened, Aditya, is that I mean, there are like a bunch of very interesting trends that I've been seeing, right? We're consuming a lot of content. I mean, and back of cheap data, and now we had
Yeah.
the time, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think what has now happened is that I think a lot of us are spending a lot more time, and that numbers across the reports, right, on smaller screens than the larger screens, right? Which essentially
Right.
means that
Yes. Yeah.
you and me could be sitting in the same room. You could have a different feed. I could have a different feed. We have our own engagement place, right? Unlike earlier
Sure.
times when the family used to sort of watch it together and all that, right?
Sure.
I think
Yeah.
that's kind of gone away. What is essentially now happening is that the influence is very, very different, right? Which
Yeah.
essentially means that we're going to be consuming very, very different products, right? Now,
Yeah.
D2C
Like
is
your
something which is
triggers and motivators, my triggers and motivators to be very
absolutely,
independent of each other. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. Now, what has
Yeah.
happened in an environment like that? So, I think what content has done, and having a personalized feed, is that
Yeah.
we have a lot of, for example, the influence is different, right?
Yeah.
And this is something that I'm discussing with many founders, right? Because we are not really understanding the element of influence and how it's going to change our consumption pattern, right?
Sure.
The other
Right.
thing which is happening is that, this has become a perfect opportunity for a lot of brands to plug themselves in that
Correct.
stream, right?
Correct.
And
Correct.
these are more dynamic brands, these are more creative brands, these are brands by a lot of professionals who, for example, been working, right? Who've
Yeah.
experienced a certain problem, created a product around it, right? And
Right.
are hitting it with a very, very sharp communication, something that
Right.
a large enterprise is not doing. So, for example, a
Right.
Dabur is not going to be very sensitive to, or is possibly not going to look at D2C in a that significant a way, because it's still
Possibly.
something which
Right.
is coming up, with,
Very
the numbers
small
could be
business for
smaller.
them. Right. Right.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
insignificant, right? They
Yeah.
could have a
Yeah.
longish, larger strategy, but can come at a different level. What do
Right.
you make out of an event like this, right? Because consumer demand, like I said, is shifting, right? The influence is happening. The other thing is that there is more. I mean, because of COVID, people were saving more. I mean, of course, at a macroeconomic level,
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
needed, but I think
Yeah.
if you look at urban areas, people had more money to sort of to kind of spend, right? And then they
Spend.
started to
Right.
experiment a lot, right? What do you
Yeah.
think of this
Yeah.
new cycle, right? What do you
Yeah.
make out of this? This is a direct relationship with the customer. You don't
Right.
need anybody in the middle, right? You don't
Right.
have anybody who's influencing your decision because he or she has
Sure.
better margins, right? This is a very clear communication, right? What do you make
Yeah.
out of this, right? Because this is something which is going to be significant. This is going to be large. We are anticipating it to be 100
Right.
billion industry in the next couple of years. Right? This
Right.
is they're here to stay, right? This is the new retail that we're talking
Right.
about.
Right.
What do you make out of
So
that? Because you operate largely in an offline setting, right? You
offline
enabling
channel.
that.
Right. Right. So I completely agree that, COVID, of course, made the triggers and motivators independent of each other. COVID, of course, caused a lot of, I would not say revenge buying, but yeah, the ability to spend sort of went up, and the
Right,
avenues to spend went down, right?
right,
So the easiest thing you could probably spend your money on was, ordering something that, an ad sort of popped up on your Instagram story feed, and you said,
right,
oh, wow, this seems like, I saw water additive, and I saw, what all new products sort of coming in from
right,
D2C perspective. So I think that is definitely here to stay. I think now the great part is that, you have a product idea, you can find a co-packer. There are thousands of them available. Just Google what you want to make, speak to
right,
them, get a batch made, go to FBA and just launch it on Amazon, right?
right,
It's become actually a 4-step, 5-step process to figure out a D2C sort of product. Having said that, I think the companies which have really grown very well are companies which were in the business for about a few years before COVID happened.
right,
So I have huge respect for, brands like Mamaearth or Wow Skin Science, who've been in the market for 4-5 years.
right,
And then sort of COVID hit, and then the consumption pattern went up. Digital wallets, digital payments, cheap
right,
data, all that sort of triggered everything together for them to sort of, go ahead and interact with consumers more and more.
right,
So I think D2C is here to stay. A lot of respect for the brands that have built up here. And I think what is also good is that they seem to be closer to what consumers are looking for urgently. Of
right,
course, I would still say that these could be the top 1% or 2% consumers in India who are
right,
that upwardly mobile, who live in bigger cities, who live in pin codes where deliveries are 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, and not 2 weeks or
right,
that they are saying that, oh wow, this is a new skin cream I can buy, right? I
right,
mean, I don't use much of it, but I can always say that I can give it a shot. So
right,
I think that is a great space to sort of be in. A lot of new brands have come in, and the way they are, I would not say giving big brands a run for their money, but yeah, definitely in a certain set of consumers,
mhm,
these brands are having a good share of voice that is
right,
sort of happening, right? But I want to give you a bit of our perspective on D2C, right? That is, I would say in the top 25 top D2C brands in India, there's not a single brand that has not spoken to us in the last 1.5 years.
interesting,
The thing is that D2C is doing really really well, and
right,
as of now 90% of their business is from the online channel.
right,
Offline, some of them have got listed at the top retail chains, some of them have
mhm,
found distributors in bigger cities, but
mhm,
eventually they also realize that even if the skew of online offline keeps changing, offline will remain maybe 70%, 75% of the overall FMCG channel.
right,
And do I want to be where my consumer is going? The answer is always going to be yes.
right,
Now, how do I get there is going to be a question. Do I go like the way of, let's say, an Udan or a My Dukan, where I just list
right,
myself and the retailer can order and I courier the products to them? Or do I go the traditional way and appoint distributors like bigger FMCGs, give
right,
them credit and give them salesmen and let them go and order? That is still something I think is getting figured out.
right,
So some of them are going one way, some of them are going the other way. But end of the day, the moment of truth that I spoke about, where we want to create magic,
right,
that remains the same for the person because the store is the same. So, the Meta store or the Goel store where I buy my products from is having all the shampoos in one huge shelf,
Right.
which is where, your D2C brand also needs 4 to 6 facings.
Right.
So what we are telling them is that whenever you reach the Mehta store, appoint us, because we can at least create that differentiation there. Because if you are talking about natural goodness, or you're talking about a big product differentiator, consumers may be going to the store and asking for the brand, but you also want to get consumers which are asking for a shampoo.
Interesting.
Or asking for a face wash. So I think that is happening. So D2C will continue growing the way they are growing. I think they have phenomenal money also being put in. I think they know the online world much better than the traditional FMCG companies. It's a big learning experience for them. So that is a channel which they can continue to grow and expand business. But I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we should see the bigger D2C players present in the top 20-25,000 grocers and modern trades in India for sure. Which is where I'm hoping my next level of growth sort of comes.
I completely agree with a lot of what you're saying, right? And I think at least my thesis is that, I think Indian consumer is one. I think we operated many layers, right? So we are not an easy market, but extremely complicated market, right? And I think, and while we can fancy ourselves, right, by saying that India is changing and there's homogeneity which is coming in, and we're very becoming very, say, savvy in our consumption and all that, right? But I think the fact of the matter is, I mean, I stay in Delhi, I stay in north of India. What you very clearly see is cultural baggage, right? So I don't think that's kind of going away, right? So I think that's getting passed on from generation to generation, right? So I think this is not something that is going to change, right? And I think that has to be factored in, which essentially means there'll have to be a huge experiential play that a lot of these brands will have to build. I think, and for that, you'll have to be in a physical setting. You'll have to be at a store, right? You can't choose not to be there, I think, because that's not a business which is going to go away, right? It might reduce, the pace of it might reduce, especially in tier A or Cat A cities. But I think in cities which are smaller, right, where people have the time, people have the, they're not longer distances. I think a lot of this will continue to sort of happen, right? And I think, like I said, India is a large market. You really can't cut it. That brings me to a very interesting point, right, Aditya? Also, is that there is only when you're doing digital, for example, right? You can cut your consumer in just about a few very predictable parameters. And now that's if I'm a brand A and you're a brand B, that's true for me and that's true for you, right? Now, over a period of time, because of the performance that you've had, right, the possibility of us doing this almost the same activity is essentially getting together, right? There are a lot of enablers who are coming in the process, right? And I call them arm supplier, right? And they're arm suppliers to you and they're arm suppliers to me, right? To sort of do our business, right? Which is going to make it very, very difficult. They'll need a lot of on-ground data. Now, traditionally, what has happened is a lot of these players have been dependent on, organizations like Nielsen and many others, right, to collect a lot of last-mile data, which has been secondary research for them. Which has been primary research for them, but which has been lagged research, right? It's a two-dimensional research, the way I put it, right? It becomes important for them to register a lot of store-level interactive data, right? And that is going to give them a very different kind of an understanding of, what they could possibly do to engage their customer better, eventually leading into a better consumption, which is, and I think everybody's going to try and optimize that ROI. And I think that's something that we kind of alluded to, right in the beginning of our conversation, right? What's your sense of it? And, at Love in Store, what are some of those, pieces that you track, for example, right? If I'm to ask you, right, at a data level, what are some of the things? How do you cut it at a store level, right? What are some of those engagements that you are mapping out? Tell me a little more about.
Right. So I'll answer that in two parts. One is for, our current clients, and second is for the prospect clients that we may be working with.
Sure.
See, with the current clients, the good part is that, we are visiting the top, 30,000 groceries in India. We are visiting the top 5,000 odd modern trades in India. And these are being visited with a technology application that has a very detailed use case. Now, what are the data that is available with us that we capture, which we then analyze? We know your share of shelf, we know your on-shelf availability, we know what promotions are running, we know how your merchandising assets are doing, we know how many consumers are interacting with your brand, we know what exactly competition is doing. So what we are trying to do right now is, of course, for the current clients, identify more opportunities of growth. It could be as simple as telling them that, a certain chain or a certain city has got a certain local player or a D2C player which is suddenly doing a lot of activity, because D2Cs don't do a spray and pray approach. They always sort of look at, okay, this market is doing well for me online. Let's say I'm doing very well in Tamil Nadu online. So let me target Tamil Nadu first offline. So I think that is where I think the current clients sort of work with us and they get a lot of information insights from us. right? Now, the data that we capture is all of this is proprietary to the clients that we operate, but this remains with them, right? There's a huge set of data that we capture from our managerial workforces, from our relationships with the stores, our relationships with the chains, which is where we are trying to help the D2C brands to work with. Now, to give an example of one of the big D2C brands in the personal care space, we are trying to sort of helping them make the strategies in terms of, what market is something they know, because they know they have existing consumers online in that market. But within the market, which are the top stores for their category that they want to go to? Which are the stores where they can get some fantastic visibility? In the first interaction with the store, telling them what kind of program you can run, what kind of money you can pay, or what kind of visibility you can get, or at least telling them that every brand which is active has 12 facings in your category. So look at a visibility program which sort of works in that direction, or do a full range in one window, etc. This is where the D2C brands are coming for help. See, they are experts in online, but when it comes to offline, of course, there are huge consulting firms that sort of work with them to help them out. But we are the people who can tell them that don't do this, because again, a lot of them are flush with funds. And it's very rarely that they hear somebody saying that don't spend so much money. Spend a little less, figure this out, do 100 stores in Kolkata, just see if it is leading to the kind of business delta that you were looking at in a period of 1 month to 3 months. And the 4th month, take it to 10,000 stores, doesn't matter. I'll be a great partner in both those journeys. I think that is where D2Cs are looking at it. For the larger companies, what they are looking at is further growth from the stores they're already very much present in.
No, interesting. Aditya, you're possibly the bad guy in the game, right? I mean, because a lot of these
sometimes
a lot of these D2C brands that you're talking about are essentially calibrated to be spending. I mean, that's what they're raising money for.
They are,
to actually sort of incentivize the customer, onboard the customer, change behavior, right? I think there's a lot of that, right? So it might not necessarily be correct saying, don't spend a little too much, right? I think because they have targets to meet on spend, right? Which is incredible,
sometimes,
right? In that sense. I think I'm going to move to, a point on Bharat, right? I think Bharat is very, very important, right? In terms of us as a country, right? And you'll be actually surprised, right? Every single conversation, Bharat is something which is becoming so much more pertinent, right? And that is largely because that information arbitrage that existed, that exposure arbitrage that existed, actually gone away, right? Last one has been absolutely phenomenal as far as that is concerned, right? So a kid sitting in Bhopal and a kid sitting in, say, a Delhi or a Bombay or a Bangalore, essentially now, consuming the same kind of content.
Same
media, right? And it's amazing, right? So while, of course, the ability to spend could be a little lesser, right? But aspirationally speaking, right? And I think Bharat is, for some reason, I think is a little more aggressive in terms of their wanting their aspiration to consume, right? Because they've been underserved in many, many ways, right? And I think it's like a pent-up play in many ways, right? And I think that's something that everybody wants to now capture. Now, it becomes very, very relevant in a FMCG environment, right? In a D2C environment, right? It just becomes so much more relevant. What's your sense of Bharat, right? I mean, given that you are evangelizing a lot of innovation, right? Through these larger brands, for these D2C brands across multiple cities, your existence yourself is across multiple cities. What do you make out of Bharat, right? It could be an observation, and it could also be a direction in terms of what brands should do, right, to tackle Bharat, because it's a complex environment to deal with.
Sure. I think, so I think first covering Bharat, right? I think I think there's a pre-TikTok, post-TikTok sort of revolution that sort of happened. So one is, definitely they now consume the same media. So for example, they can, of course, it's a possibility they will see the same ad maybe in a vernacular language, because that is how it is tailored, and that is a great kind of targeting that digital can sort of give you. But because of the geo revolution, because of the kind of, internet speed and internet pricing that happened, they are consuming the same videos on YouTube, and probably a lot more on YouTube, right? So when I look at some of the views on some of the channels that, I started following, I think in COVID, I discovered, the Lullan Tops of the world, to realize, okay, there is another huge media industry that existed, which sort of I was not exposed to, but because I started consuming so much more YouTube now, is when I realized, okay, all this sort of happening. So they consume the same media, which means they consume the same ads, which means that their aspirations become similar. I think from the capacity of buying perspective, I think that there's not much dichotomy left between the two, because I think, but I think it is actually the risk capacity, in the sense that, as an urban consumer, I may go to a store and something which is 99 is something worth buying for me. But for that consumer, maybe that threshold could be a 79. Not because they don't have the money, but because they don't want to, because they don't have a store where they can easily go and look at something, or they don't have many other people who are trying it or buying it, etc., etc.
Right.
But what is happening in terms of how the consumer consumption pattern is changing, right? For larger FMCGs, I think the fundas have largely remained the same, which has worked very well for them, where they
Right.
said that it's going to be the same brand, but I'll do some differentiation on packaging, considering how the consumption sort of there solves. You know,
Right.
something could be as simple like an LUP, like a low unit price, where
Right.
you see a pack which is the same product in a lower price in the market. And secondly, there could be very specific, like in food companies, you will see local flavors sort of being the entrant there.
Right.
Now, I think where the opportunity lies for D2C here is very, very large, because the thing is that the D2C, the phase that they've developed in, right, I think they never had a reason to differentiate between Bharat and India, because
Right.
their cost to serve was really never different. See, they urban bigger FMCG said that, when I go to a bigger city, I pay to a distributor and a retailer, and then a consumer comes in. When I go
Right.
to a smaller city, I have a distributor, sub-distributor, retailer, and then consumer comes in. So I
Right.
add channel less for shipping. D2C, that never existed, right? So if you buy a
Right.
product from Amazon, it gets shipped to you directly. And for me, the spend is not different. In
Right.
fact, what I want to do is I want to capture markets where probably that competition does not exist so much.
Right.
So I think what will happen in Bharat definitely is that D2C brands which are able to find great, I think liking of consumers in the urban markets will be able to grow faster in those markets.
Right.
I think that is where I definitely see a huge opportunity for them. I think some of the brands are already doing it really well. Some of the recent communication on some D2C brands going vernacular is something that it made sense to me that this is happening. And
Right.
now when I look at the micro influencers, now I look at the influencers which are talking in a certain language or behaving in a certain way and then tying up with brands.
Right.
It is very clear that, D2C brands understand this, that it'll be easier for me to crack this market, because this consumer is yet to be spoiled for choice.
Right.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. I think that is definitely there. See, look at it this way, right? I mean, if you are a Bharat consumer, you don't want to be looked at differently, right? And this conversation is now so open, right? You may not, you say that, no, I'm a consumer. I probably I don't live in a metro, but that doesn't mean that a brand needs to look at me differently. But like what D2C does, it democratizes this so well, saying that you may live wherever you may live. The pricing is the same, the product is the same. We really want you to use this. Use this code to get 20% off and then buy it. So I think that internet, the value seeking capability, the intent of buying something which is new, maybe looking at it at, if I'm buying something online, it is as close to the urban as possible, is probably something which is really working in this favor. I think that is where D2C will click. Yeah.
I would want to, I would love to sort of, this is one point I would love to discuss further, right? And I'd love to debate it out, right? But I'm gonna just make a quick point, and I'm gonna reserve that conversation for our next, I'm gonna reserve that point for our next conversation, right? But my sense is, right, I think with many of these D2C brands coming up, right, I think, and second, I think content, we're in an extremely, we're infancy, right? We're in a very early stage right now, right? And as we progress, another possibly a year and a half life, right? I think one thing which is absolutely clear, at least a very core part of my at least thesis, right, when I'm looking at business and when I'm talking to founders, is that, and I'm looking at data, right, is that, I think it's going to be very difficult to differentiate yourself and fight yourself out beyond a 15 to 18 month period, right? I think that's number one, right? Yeah. Second, I think right now where we are, when we speak of Bharat and when we talk of Bharat, right, is there's an aspirational element which sort of comes in, right? And that's where people want to sort of consume and so on and so forth, right?
Correct.
But it's going to be very quick where these people are now going to be smart and they're going to be educated, right? So, you can fool some people sometime, not all the people all the time. What I essentially am trying to sort of say is that you can have that early buy-in, but that might not necessarily translate into a much longer term relationship because their preferences now changed. Second, they have an option. Third, they want to sort of look at that issue that they're wanting to sort of tackle in a different way altogether, right? And that is all possible because, content is just going to sort of be available across all of these aspects, right?
Right.
So my sense is, I think it's going to be, it's easier said than done. I think I kind of agree with a lot of what you're saying, right? But I think it'll have to be cut much more sharply. We're going to have possibly 100,000 brands that are going to come up that are going to be much smaller out of, say, your house, my house, which are going to do just about a few lakhs of business, but they're going to be profitable businesses. They might not translate into being larger
Right.
fund-backed businesses, right? But we're going to see
Right.
many of those businesses, right? I think that's my sense of it. But listen, like I said, I'm going to reserve that point and for our next discussion, right? And
Sure.
hopefully we're going to have that soon.
Sure.
Towards the end of our conversation, Aditya, right? And I cannot let you go without asking you, uh, a question on your bootstrap journey, right? It's
Right.
not an easy one, right? It's a fairly
Right.
difficult one, right? I think most
Right.
importantly, a lot of stakeholders, which are at a personal level, right? Which is your family, your siblings, right?
Right. Yeah.
Your wife, and her family, and in that case, right? A lot of that gets affected, right, by a decision that you've taken, right? How
Right.
difficult has that been, right, at a personal level to steer through all of that, right? I mean, you've been a profitable company, you've been a growing
Right.
company, right?
Right.
These but how difficult has that been, right? To ensure that everybody is, you know, uh, with you in it, happy for you,
Right.
right? Not
Right.
necessarily worried that what's going to happen and where are you going to be by the end of it, right? How's that
Right.
journey been? Tell me a little more about that.
Right. I think I'll sound probably at the opposite end of most of these conversations. It was not that hard for me in any sense at all. So, see, on a
Right,
serious note, I think, being bootstrapped, I don't know the other side. So I'm not really very sure of, how raising funding and all of that worked. I have a little bit of exposure where we had some
right,
conversations with some people, and we realized that, I don't think the valuation models which are existing right now work very well for a B2B profitable business like ours.
sure,
And probably we'll have to dilute too much equity. But for what? What are we in the business for? And we realized
right,
that we want to build a 50, 100-year legacy. I mean, I want to be out of all executive roles in the next few years and run this company for the next 50, 100 years. It should outlast the founders, and
right,
that should be the one point agenda with which we're building the organization, right? Otherwise, I
right,
was very happy in a job and making good amount of money. So I think from that perspective in mind, it was not really a choice to make between being bootstrapped and being funded. Probably this just made more sense. Having said that, in the future, maybe we look at strategic investments that help us grow the business better. When we go
right,
international, we think we'll do some tie-ups in those countries, which is probably the plan in the next few years. I think from a personal level, honestly, I again, very supportive parents living at home rent free. I think it's a dream for an entrepreneur to sort of start up at that stage. So I was thinking that is the life stage I was at. I got married, of course, in the last, it's been close to 3 years now that I've been married and all of that. But I've always found good amount of support in terms of people
right,
around us. I think not really being questioned. Otherwise, my single advice to all founders is that, if you're planning to start up, have money saved up, you don't want to raise, just put 1.5, 2 years of spends in a bank account and live off that, and
right,
everything else you put in the business, so that you at least have a 2 year runway. Essentially, I think what happens to founders is, because I think the founders bias is so strong that, I'm going to put in 20 lakhs and make it
right,
200 crores in 2 years, 3 years, that they go all in. So which I always
right,
say that no, you need to live and survive, and you're going to have hard days and difficult days. So if you're
right.
able to divide that money into, personal spends and then company, probably it could be an easier strategy to take. Yeah, it's been an easy one for us. Yeah, we've been very lucky, I would say.
Super. You've actually made it easy for me. I mean, typically my last question in the conversation is, what's your advice? And I think you've given a brilliant one, right? And I think, but
Yeah,
I believe that that fool's confidence is also important, right? I think I think that's very critical in the process, right? Aditya, last question, right? What are the next 2 years like? For Love in Store, right? What are some of the goals, targets that you've set for yourself, for your team, right? What are the next 2 years going to look like? I mean, I would have loved
yeah,
to ask you a 5 year question, but I think that's a little, I think,
yeah. We'll not be
not
able
the
to
right
answer
time.
5 years. Yeah, I
But
think
not
2 years.
not the right time to be asking a 5 year question.
Yeah, I think, see, we're going to be 5 years old soon. So I think another 2 years, what I would want to do is, of course, increase our exposure to non-FMCG companies. We're already seeing a lot of interest this year. So I
Right.
think the idea would be to grow this. I was the only salesman till 1 year back. So I think the sales team needs to increase in size and get more business from non-FMCG. We are looking at exploring a few foreign markets nearby. Definitely to expand the business further, to see how it goes, because technology is in place, people are in place, and
Right.
and all of those things. And I think maybe explore something in the e-com channel as well, as it's getting larger and larger. Maybe one of our D2C customers are going to tell us that, okay, do this also for us. So I think one simple advice, as I said to founders, is that in a B2B business, it is way easier to sell more services to the same customer than
Right.
figure out new services for a new customer. So I think that would be the next 2 odd years. Hopefully we'll be at a much bigger revenue, 2 to 3 times of where we are at right now in the next 2 years.
Super. Aditya, it was a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much for for taking the time out. Right. I think I
Sure.
thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I mean, this has now become almost normal, right? That I'll end up saying that how I want these conversations to go on, right? Because we
Right.
tend to pick up on some very interesting points and facets, right, across conversations, and it just becomes important that you have detailed conversations on them, right? But listen, I think what this conversation has kind of stood out is we've discussed a lot of it at a very tangential level, right? I think India is a
Right.
very large market. It's a complex market, right? And we need to cut through across the layers, right? The biases and the baggages that we have, right? In a large ship
Sure.
that we are. Uh, and it just becomes so much more important that we discuss a lot of those points, right? But listen, I'd look forward to having you with us much sooner, right? And having a far more detailed conversation on some very specific aspects, right? When you talk of retail, when you talk
Sure.
about offline, because offline is something which is not going to go away. I think offline is something, I think these are going to coexist. Uh, Eventually, whatever you do in the digital medium, you'll have to back it up by an offline, very sharp offline strategy. And I think you possibly, as an entity, as a
Yeah.
geared to enable that for many players, right? I think that entire stack has come together beautifully, right? I think it's just so much more easier for brands to scale, right, with you. On that note, Aditya, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you, Ashu. Thank you so much, and hope to be back again soon. Take care.